So we will first hear from Deb Stein, the Network Director for the Partnership for America's Children. The Partnership for America's Children is the network of multi-issue child advocacy organizations across the country. And the partnership is serving as the hub for the full count efforts on young kids. So we really could not have a better expert than Deb to walk us through this issue. And then I'm very happy to say that two leading funders in this area have joined us to talk about the efforts in their foundations, one from a state perspective and one from a national perspective. So you'll then hear, after Deb talks, there'll be a conversation between Deborah and Florencia Gutierrez from the Annie E. Casey Foundation, where she works extensively on Kids Count and also leads the census efforts. And also Kiki Jamieson, president of the Fund for New Jersey, who has been a real leader in New Jersey on how New Jersey can pull together across sectors, across funders, across nonprofit sectors to ensure all kids in New Jersey are counted. So we plan to have a conversation between the three of them after this brief presentation, and then we will open it up for us all to talk together. It's my great pleasure to turn it over to Deborah Stein.
Great. Thank you so much, and I'm really grateful to you for hosting this conversation because as a community that cares about young children, this is actually one of the things that you can do that will improve funding for a wide range of resources for young children for a decade, and it does so without any step in the process where Congress or the President is involved. It's formulaic, and so if you improve the count in your community, kids will get counted and there will be more funding coming in, regardless of what's happening at the national level. And in days like now, when there's a lot of national controversy and it's hard to pass things nationally, that's an exciting opportunity to have that level of control. So these are the things I really hope you'll walk away from here with. I'm only going to do a very brief presentation because we really want to get to the meat of the conversation. But the four things that you really need to know are that the number of young children that were missed in the 2010 decennial census is very big, and that number has been growing for 40 years. And the results of missing young children are very serious. Secondly, because they're missed for different reasons than adults, we need to count them differently than we count adults. Adults generally are missed because they don't return the form. Young children are mostly in households that got counted but left the young child off. And so we need to count them differently. Thirdly, there are advocates working both nationally and in states and localities to improve the count. And fourthly, funders can play several different roles in improving the count of young children. It's not just a matter of funding, and so we want to share those opportunities and ideas with you. So why does being counted help young children thrive? Well, it increases the political representation in their communities. It means more funding for some of the key children's programs overall. And in fact, for 5 programs, Medicaid, CHIP, foster care, adoption, and child care, because there was such a big undercount in 2010, states lost over $500 million a year just from the young child undercount, just from those 5 programs. So in those areas, we actually get more total federal funding. It also means that for programs where total federal funding is capped, if we count to, more accurately, the funding is more equitably distributed and the kids who need it most get it. It helps with government planning. It helps with better information on the well-being of kids. And the thing to keep in mind is that this data impact lasts for a decade because every other census thing is a survey. It is based on a sampling, and where they sample, how many people they sample in a community is based on the decennial census and estimates out from there. So why is this undercount large and growing? Well, first of all, how many did we miss? We missed 1 in 10 young children in 2010. You're going to see 2 sets of numbers. One is the number of kids missed, the omissions, and you're also going to see net undercount because they overcount some children. Hang on one second here. Yeah, is that better for folks? I can see some people are having trouble hearing me. So in 2010, they missed 2.2 million young children, 1 in 10 young children. They also double counted some children, or kids were counted when they weren't really born until after the census date. For various reasons, if you try and figure out the total number of young children, their count was wrong by just under 1 million, which is a common, you take the total number of kids missed and subtract from it to double count. It's the highest net undercount by far of any age group in the 2010 census. So they missed nearly 5% net undercount of young children. And the next biggest group that they missed is the 5 to 9-year-olds, where they missed over 2% of young children. No other age group comes close to that, and it's also because it's so many people, numerically it's the most. It is the single most significant undercount of any age group in the census by a large margin. And it's been getting worse since 1980. Up until 1980, the number of kids that got counted, was about, they did about as well as on young children as adults. But since then, the undercount's been getting steadily worse. So why do we miss young children in the census? Well, we don't have really good answers, but there are some important things that we know. We know they're missed because they're left off the roster or the questionnaire, and not because the whole household wasn't reported. We know they're more likely to be missed if they live in a complex household, meaning not just parent or parents and children, but could be grandparents and parent and child, or just grandparents raising the grandchild. Could be siblings living together. It could be aunts and uncles raising the children, or it can be unrelated people, and we think that may actually be a relatively big component. So, for example, if a family doesn't have a permanent home and they're staying temporarily with friends, that makes a complex household. And we know children in that setup are particularly at risk of not being counted. We also know there's a lot of fear and confusion about whether to count young children. Many people are afraid to report that they have the young children in the household. They may be afraid because they have too many people in the household, or they're living in senior citizens housing. But we also know that they just don't know that they're supposed to include them, or whether they're supposed to include them. They're confused about it. They have, in some cases, they're hard to count for the same reasons as adults. It's really hard to harder to count people who live in a rental or moved recently. That's true for children too, but children are more likely to live in a rental or to have moved recently, and so that makes them harder to count. And then we have very recent research that tries to figure out where most kids are at the risk of being missed, because hard to count areas that are hard to count for adults are typically based on people not returning the form. But since kids are in households that got counted, that's not a good way to identify areas with lots of kids at risk of being missed. So recent research tells us that areas with many children of color, or many linguistically isolated households, or many grandparent households, or children who are not related to the householder, which doesn't mean they're living without relatives, but that they and their relative are not related to the householder. All of those mean that the area is likely to have a lot of kids who could be missed in the census. So we are actually doing some work to count all children in 2020, and we have two related efforts, a committee and a campaign. And we're basing our work in both of these on a theory of what works. We know that the Census Bureau approach to counting adults, which targets low response areas and then does a lot of ads and campaigns with messaging around returning the form, seems to work for adults. But because young kids are usually missed when they are left off the form, we are working with PRB and Dr. Bill O'Hare and the Hard to Count Map project to get the Hard to Count Map project to include the kind of data I just went through, so that you can figure out where kids are often left off. We are doing message research. We'll develop outreach tools like flyers and posters and fact sheets and social media to help persuade families to count young children. And we're working with the Census Bureau to get them to conduct outreach specifically around counting young children in the 2020 census. So we have two efforts. The National Complete Count Committee for Young Children, the Count All Kids Committee, is doing the work with the Census Bureau to improve their strategies and coordinating national awareness efforts and engaging national networks that work with families of young children. And the Count All Kids campaign supports state and local efforts to form complete count committees, including priority on counting young children. And I'll talk about what those are in a second. And then to work with those committees to build plans prioritizing young children for outreach and to use message-tested outreach materials. And then separately, we're trying to work with our national networks and with the coalitions that work with my members in the states to use our outreach materials with families with young children in 2020. So we're trying to engage child care providers and pediatric care providers and faith communities and libraries and pretty much any kind of network that has a lot of contacts with young children to use outreach materials and persuade them to be counted. What is a complete count committee? Basically, it's a state group or a local group that is assembled. It can be a government body or it can be a private body with nonprofits and foundations or a mix that is designed to promote census participation. And as you can see, ideally they include a really wide range of partners and players so that you can conduct outreach in many different ways to the communities. You'll notice from this chart, though, that what it doesn't do is say, who's responsible for reaching out to young children or who's responsible for other hard-to-count communities. So it's important for advocates who sit on these committees or work with them to make sure that everyone on the committee, no matter who they're trying to reach out to, understands the issue of counting young children and how to do that effectively. So that's a really brief update, and if people have questions later, I included some slides at the end that you'll get afterwards with more specific data, or I'm happy to answer them. But I really want to go on to the meat of what we're trying to do today and talk about what funders can do. So, Flo, I'm going to start with you. I know from my members who are advocacy groups that work in states and localities on behalf of children, there are two reasons that they find that this is especially important and that drive why they engage so much in the census work. First of all, it affects a multitude of funding streams for young children, and a good count can improve that funding for a decade. And because that count, the allocation of the funding is by formula, that's true no matter who's in Congress or in the presidency. But secondly, my members and many other advocates are really concerned about the well-being of children of color who are a growing part of our country. And my members are particularly trying to improve the count of young children of color. We know that young children of color are particularly high risk of being missed. If we can increase the count of those children, that in a small way undoes some institutional racism by making those children more visible, their communities stronger, and steering more resources to them. So, Flo, my question for you after that very long introduction is, what is driving you and your foundation, the Annie Casey Foundation's interest in the census and the young child undercount? How does it affect your work and your mission?
Great. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So first, I just want to thank everyone for joining the call. Hopefully, by the end of it, you'll all join us in the fight to ensure that all kids are counted in 2020. But we understand that ensuring an accurate count helps the foundation achieve our mission of making sure that all of our kids, their families, and their communities have the resources and the access to opportunity that they need to be healthy, to succeed, and to thrive. In addition to really being core to our mission to strengthen families, communities, and children, the data from the census really guides our strategy, it guides our investments, and the evaluations that we do on our work. It is also a cornerstone to our Kids Count project and our work, and really core for the American neighborhood and community data that the foundation really relies on for planning purposes. So because of the repercussions that the census data have for our children, families, and communities, when it comes to resources and for voice and representation, and because it really impacts our ability to effectively do our job, we really decided that the ensuring an accurate count in 2020 was a priority for us. We started working on this in 2016 because we feel it's really important, and we'll continue to work on it past 2020, since we get a feeling that the fight won't be over in 2020.
Great. Kiki, can you tell us, as a state funder, why this is a big issue for you and how it affects your work and mission?
Yes, thank you, and I echo Flo. Thank you so much, everybody, for being part of this, and thanks, Shannon, for inviting me to participate. The Fund for New Jersey is a state funder that actually doesn't specifically focus on young children. We focus on good public policy decision making. So for us, the reasons are very similar to those of Flo's. Right? Our grant making is focused on supporting the combination of good information and broad participation to lead to the kinds of policies and structural decisions that improve life for everybody here in the state of New Jersey. And for those reasons, data and census data are absolutely integral to everything we do, both in the area of young children, but also in the other areas of our grant making, ranging from education and housing to criminal justice reform and state fiscal analysis. We care about the federal investments in the state, and we also care about all the consequences of the accuracy or feared inaccuracy of census data that affect everything from state representation and spending to our own understanding of our effectiveness and our grantees' understanding of their effectiveness as well.
Great. So let me follow up with you and say, let's talk first about the funder traditional role of funding the works of others. Can you tell us a little bit about what groups and activities you're funding in New Jersey around the census?
Sure. So we're funding a variety of organizations, including the statewide coalition of nonprofits and civic organizations called New Jersey Counts. Our Kids Count partner, Advocates for Children of New Jersey, which is terrific, is helping to coordinate and lead that effort. They also sit at the table along with hub organizations that have particular connections and represent the interests and voices of African American communities, Latinx communities, Asian communities, immigrant communities, as well as a variety of geographic areas of the state that are particularly hard to count. In addition, we're asking all our other grantees to think about how the census affects their work and what resources and assets and innovative ideas they might bring to this effort. So, for example, one of our other grantees is the state network of community development corporations, housing organizations throughout the state. Those are community-based. Their members are community-based organizations, often in hard-to-count areas, who will be key partners in helping to reach children and their families to make sure everyone is counted.
Great. And so what are you funding both nationally and at the state or local level around the census?
So at the national level, we're supporting organizations like the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, the Census Project, the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials. We're also supporting, so those are the organizations that are really acting as a hub for the census work and building the infrastructure at the national level. We're also supporting United We Dream to activate them and to engage their networks around reaching immigrant communities, since the current environment and maybe the potential addition of the citizenship question is going to be a problem. And we also engaged Ready Nation, which is an organization that focuses on the business community to really start thinking about how we can engage business in the census early on. Now, related to young children, we are supporting the Partnership for America's Children to act as a hub for the Young Child Undercount, we're supporting the work along with a group of funders. They have been a great resource to the national and state organizations, and they're doing outreach wherever possible to engage child-serving organizations on the census. I believe that they're really a great resource for folks who are interested in learning more about the issue, of learning how they can engage and what their role can be, and how they can engage in their state and in their communities. We're also building the capacity of our Kids Count network so that they can advocate for the establishment of complete count committees in their states and communities, and so that they have the capacity to leverage their coalitions and the relationships that they have as we start gearing up for the Get Out to Count efforts that will start in 2020. One thing related to the complete count committees, we're not just asking them to be set up, but we're also asking our Kids Count folks or child advocates or organizations that have connections with children, such as libraries, pediatricians, or hospitals, to become part of those complete count committees so that the voice of children and the issue of the undercounted young children is raised up, because if it's not raised up, the likelihood that it won't be addressed is very likely. So that's also something that we've been really focused on, and just elevating the issue so that it becomes a priority across the nation. That's our goal.
Great. And I'm going to stay with you for a moment, Flo, because both you and the Casey Foundation are also undertaking activities that build on your influence and relationships. What are you doing directly about the census, not through your grantees?
Well, so Kids Count, I don't know if you all know about Kids Count, but it's been a project that's been focused on putting out quality data, using that data to improve outcomes for kids since 1990. So for close to 30 years, we have built the capacity of our network and of our child advocates and of our foundation to really use data and research to improve outcomes for children where they live. This capacity that we've built really has allowed us to sit at tables when it comes to the issues of children and the issue of the young child undercount. It has also put us in a place where we have this infrastructure that we can activate and help elevate the issue across the country. And that's something that has been really, really effective. We've also been leveraging our board. One of our board members is the president of the American Board of Pediatrics, and he's part of the Federation of Pediatric Organizations. So he plays a leadership role in that community, and he has taken it upon himself to make it a priority for the pediatric community to tackle the young child undercount. So this is huge. And the endowment that the foundation has was set up by the founder of UPS. So we're also leveraging our relationship with UPS. We're also leveraging our relationships with other foundations at the local level to pull together the series of roundtables that I mentioned to engage the business leaders on the importance of the census. And one more thing I wanted to raise is that right now there is a large funder community that meets quarterly, and also, we hold calls every month. And this funder community that's being led by the Bauman Foundation has really allowed us to make connections, to build relationships, to it has allowed us to co-fund things that we couldn't necessarily fund on our own. And I think that those relationships with other foundations, our reputation as a data-driven organization has really allowed us to build stronger relationships with the Census Bureau. It has led to stronger relationships with our national partners, with our state partners, and with other foundations.
So, Kiki, can you talk a little bit as well about what you're doing directly in New Jersey that builds on your influence and relationships, not through your grantees?
Sure, I'd be happy to, and I'm so impressed with all the things that Flo mentioned. It's really exciting to hear about all the ways that Casey is involved. The Fund for New Jersey is a much smaller foundation working in a single state, so we have a different approach, but many of the themes are the same. I'd sum it up by saying that we are speaking up as often as we can and taking every opportunity to talk about the census. It's amazing how regularly the census can be an absolutely salient topic of conversation, and I'm not kidding. We really do that as much as possible. One example of this sort of outreach and engagement has been the community of funders in New Jersey, which are terrific. You'll hear from my colleague Melissa Littman at the Henry Maryland Taub Foundation a little bit later. But she and I and others are part of the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers, which is our state association of foundations. And the Council, the New Jersey Grantmakers has really taken on a role as a champion for the census. Our conference, annual conference, is next week. It's a conference that welcomes both grantmakers and nonprofits, and the entire conference is focused on the census. It's really a new and different model for a event like this, in which all of us will be together all day, learning, engaging, and hearing a call to action for the entire public focus sector in New Jersey. So that's an interesting opportunity, and I think some other states have done similar things. We at the Fund have asked our trustees to help us think about any relationships and connections they have to other institutions and organizations so we can raise the word about census and encourage others to participate. We've done outreach to legislators and to the governor's office. And I'm delighted to say that in part related to that, we have a state complete count commission for the first time ever, and even some money in the state budget. We work closely with the Department of State and with our regional Census Bureau director to try and coordinate our activities and to build the outreach to think together about how to reach folks who we might not otherwise have been connected to. One example is taking every opportunity to speak at conferences. Some colleagues and I were in Atlantic City on Friday speaking at the state conference of the Library Association, so we can help to engage librarians in this effort. Even when the Fund for New Jersey is not a direct participant in a conference, we are using our relationships and our colleagues to help get at new audiences. An example is the Foundation for Aging in our state was having a conference. That's not a sector that we fund in, but we have a colleague foundation, again the Taub Foundation, that does. And so through those relationships, we were able to help get good information to the Foundation for Aging conference and to help set them up with speakers. So my theme really is seeking out every opportunity, raising your voice whenever possible, and recognizing that this is the epitome of a shared enterprise. And I've been not surprised but really delighted to see how eager organizations and individuals are to join us in this work.
Debbie, can I mention something?
By all means.
So one thing that, so all the visibility that we've gotten through our Kids Count work has done is that the Annie Case Foundation is housed in Baltimore. So the city reached out to me and asked if I would be part of the Complete Count Committee. So now I'm co-chairing the Health and Human Services Subcommittee of the Complete Count Committee, and I see it as an opportunity to elevate the issue of the young child undercount, not only within the committee that I'm responsible for, but within all the committees of the Complete Count Committee. So that's another thing that that we're doing here, and that I encourage folks on the phone to see if there's a Complete Count Committee in their city or within their state. And if you all have time, think about ways that you or somebody else within your organization could help raise the issue of the young child undercount in those places.
Great, I'm glad you mentioned that. Kiki, you talked a little bit about this already, but I just wanted to come back to you and see if you had something more to say. Both of your foundations fund a number of groups that work on behalf of young children. How are you leveraging those relationships with your grantees? And I know you already talked about that a little, but I wondered if you had anything to add, and then I'll turn to Flo on that.
Yes, so for us, the hub organization for young children, which is our Kids Count organization, Advocates for Children of New Jersey, is also the organization that is coordinating census work statewide. They held a conference earlier this year. Flo was one of the speakers, and it was entirely focused on the undercount of young children. We helped to encourage other founders and other nonprofits to attend so that people and organizations for whom young children might not be the only thing they did were aware of how important this issue is and how they could engage. We've also found that this is a really great way to help our grantee organizations work together, because it is an issue that crosses boundaries and crosses geographies.
Great. That's particularly good to know about how your grantees are working together on it. Flo, do you want to talk also about how you work with groups, how you're leveraging your relationships with your grantees?
Sure. So over the past couple of years, we've supported directly 16 Kids Count organizations to build the capacity in places like New York, Alabama, California, North Carolina, New Jersey, and others. We have really been astonished by what is possible by giving these organizations just a little bit of support. They have really been instrumental in building the infrastructure in their states and making sure that young children are core to any plan or infrastructure that's being established within their states and their communities. Because we're unable to support all of our partners in every state, we're also providing a ton of technical assistance to child advocates through webinars and through in-person trainings. And the Partnership for America's Children has really been instrumental in the development of this infrastructure and supporting the work of our partners at both the national and the state level. One thing that I wanted to mention is that in last year's data book, we included a focus which elevated the issue of the young child undercount, and we followed up the release of that report with an online social media campaign, which really kept the drumbeat going throughout the whole year. And we leveraged our Kids Count network in the release of this publication, and we also partnered with our national partners like the Leadership Conference and the Census Bureau in the release of that report in order to elevate the topic of the undercount of kids at all levels of government and across the country. So I'm just mentioning that because it's an example of it's not a grant that we gave out, but it's just thinking about the infrastructure that we have access to and how we can really activate and leverage that infrastructure around the young child undercount. And as part of that campaign, the social media campaign after the release of the report, we developed a very short video to educate the public on the issue of the young child undercount. We're now in the process of translating it into Spanish so that we can take that video and educate folks who have limited English proficiency. And this is a tool that we've developed. It's not really branded by us, but we developed it as something that our national partners, as well as child advocates or anybody interested in elevating the issue, could take and use for their purposes. So that's a resource for anybody on the call.
And I want to go ahead and show that. It's really very short.
Kids aren't born with the ability to drive themselves to school, or diagnose themselves when they're sick, or write legislation to protect themselves. Kids depend on adults, their families, communities, and governments to support their health, education, and well-being. And it takes a lot of us working together to help kids and their families have the resources they need. So how are resources for kids and families allocated to our communities? Much depends on the U.S. Census. The Constitution mandates that we count everyone in the country every 10 years, and the 2020 census is closer than you think. Since children can't complete a census form, they rely on us to do right by them to ensure they're counted. An accurate count means communities get the resources they need, like funding for schools, libraries, and healthcare. But right now, there's a risk that more than 2 million children under age 5 may not be counted. That's a mistake we'd have to live with for 10 years, one that would lead to crowded classrooms, underfunded programs, misleading research, and big problems for all of us. The kids most at risk of being missed include children of color and kids in low-income and immigrant families, plus young children from certain rural areas, in multifamily households, and on American Indian reservations. Our kids lose when vital community resources from schools to hospitals dwindle. These resources are critical to the long-term success of all children. The impact of missing millions of kids in the census could be devastating. For kids to count, we need to count all kids in the census. It's up to policymakers, communities, and our nation to do right by our kids. Nationally, we must ensure the 2020 U.S. Census is fully funded and inclusive, while reminding everyone that participating is convenient, safe, and required. On a local level, state, county, and city officials must engage community partners, from nurses and childcare providers to teachers and faith leaders, now to reach hard-to-count households with young kids to encourage participation in the 2020 census. The more accurate the count, the better we can track and understand how our nation's children are faring. And if we don't count children, we make their lives invisible and their futures uncertain. The 2020 census is around the corner. By acting now, we can ensure that we count all kids in the 2020 census. Visit countallkids.org to learn more and take action. The kids in your community are counting on you.
So I really did want everyone to see that. I think it's a great tool, and it is being translated in Spanish for those of you who work with Spanish-speaking communities. And then it will refer to the NALEO website for Spanish materials as well as to ours for English. Kiki, I want to go back to you and ask you as a state funder, when you started undertaking this work, what other organizations and resources were most useful to you? Who should other funders reach out to if they want to get engaged in this?
Yes, so there are a number that have been incredibly useful. The Funders Census Initiative, it has been terrific, and I encourage everybody to join that. It's a great resource for information. There are toolkits, there are templates, there are a lot of resources, and that really is the theme. This work is happening in communities and states all over the country, and the folks who are working on it have been very generous in sharing information, and so it should really never be necessary to create something entirely from scratch. And FCI can be a good resource for that. In addition, the Democracy Funders subgroup focused on census that's housed at the Bauman Foundation, which is led by Gary Bass, Flo mentioned them. They are a very helpful resource, and there's a consultant there named Karen Narasaki who is just phenomenal. The United Philanthropy Forum has a lot of resources and information and gathers up various efforts in different states. That has been useful to us. The Leadership Conference on Civil Rights is also one of the national hub organizations that's funded by the Funders Group and has useful information. The Census Bureau I see all these things are on the slide now. The Census Bureau itself is very helpful, and I'd encourage everyone to meet and reach out to and meet your local regional census director. Having a good relationship with the people in the Bureau is very important. So we've been really, really happy with all the resources that have been made available to us, and we've tried to be just as generous in return.
Thanks. And some of the resources you mentioned are up there. We'll make sure all of them go out afterwards. I think this is a good time to open this up to the audience and see what people in the audience are doing to support the count of young children, and whether you have ideas that should be replicated around the country. And I actually am going to call on someone first. I'm going to call on Melissa Whitman from the
The conference has been unmuted. The conference has been unmuted.
Yeah, we're opening it up so you can all hear. So Melissa, can you talk a little bit about your wonderful book?
I'd be glad to. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Okay. So I'm Melissa Litwin. I'm with the Taub Foundation in northern New Jersey. And first and foremost, we are in the process of funding the advocacy and infrastructure in the ecosystem for full census engagement. So working on the big picture with Kiki and others. Statewide, that's led by ACNJ. We're a regional funder, so at the local level, I'm also on a bunch of CCCs and tracking that. But we are a literacy funder, so additionally, we are supporting the creation of a board book for adults to read together with young children. The grantee is Simply Put Media. They're a 501c3 mission-based publisher. And the book is a counting book with pages for 1 to 10. Each page is both a different number and introduces you to a child who shows you the portrait of their family who is of that number size. Each family represents an undercounted group in living in the kinds of situations we discussed today. There are parts of the book for adults to read aloud to kids. There are parts for adults and kids to discuss together.
Access.
Do you hear okay? And there's a thread throughout of advice that's intended for adults about how and why to participate in the census. The illustrations, each page is illustrated by a different artist who is affiliated with the population where they represented a family. We're going to have 11,000 copies with some co-funders, printed and distributed by trusted partners such as home visitors. And we're doing this in Passaic County, which is a place in northern New Jersey with a lot of poverty and a lot of communities at risk for undercount. We'll do a small pilot this summer and a broader implementation this fall, and I will have data to share in the coming months. So books will be available for broader distribution soon. I have a galley copy on my desk that's just bringing so much joy. So you can wait for the knowledge, attitudes, and intention survey to come out soon, or if you know this is something that would be helpful to you, I can connect you sooner. Any questions? Great,
so Melissa, this is Shannon with ECFC, and somebody did ask about whether the book was going to be available. So one of the things we'll want to do is to work with you to figure out what's the most efficient way that people could follow up with you. Should we put something on our ECFC website? Should we distribute your email widely, or is there a better way to do it? So if you have an idea now, why don't you share it? Otherwise, I guess we'll work on it and send a note to everybody who has been on the webinar.
Right. Let's start with the website, and then I'm happy to share from there. And this has been a very rapidly developing project, and I think that we're going to be in a position to talk about timing very soon. So thank you so much for your interest, and I'd love to just gather all the names and information and share them with Simply Put.
Okay. Thank you, and I've seen the book. It's really lovely, and I think will be a good tool. I do want to answer one question that we got a little earlier, which is where can we access educational and outreach materials to reach children and their families in Spanish? We at the Count All Kids effort have not yet started producing outreach materials because we are still doing our message research. We've done a number of focus groups, and we have a survey that will go in the field shortly. We are now looking for people to use that message research to produce fact sheets and educational materials, and we'll be providing those in English and Spanish, and I hope in several other languages. If you want to get our outreach materials when they're available, as well as getting information on our message research, we'll do a webinar with the Funders Committee on it in September. The best way to make sure you get it is to go to countallkids.org and sign up for the campaign, which is at the bottom of the list. There's a couple of different sign-ups on there. You're certainly welcome to join the committee, which is doing direct advocacy, but if you just want to get our resources and materials and use them with your grantees and your networks and the the organizations you work with, sign up at countallkids.org for the campaign, and we'll be sending out all kinds of materials as they're available, both in English and in Spanish, and I'm hoping to be able to translate it into a number of other languages, working with national coalition partners that are working with communities in different languages so that we can make sure our translations are really strong. Do we have anyone else in the audience who is also working on the census themselves at this point, and what are you doing?
Hello?
Yes?
Hi, this is Joni. This is Joni James. I am with the Foundation for Healthy St. Petersburg in Florida. We are a health conversion foundation about 5 years old, and our mission is health equity. So our strategy, we work through multi-sector convening, and we actually consider the Complete Count Committee structure really just another multi-sector convening. So we have gotten very involved with our county Complete Count Committee. I sit on it, as well as a couple of other staffers sit on some subcommittees. We are, here we call it the Undercount, not hard to count, but Undercount. I'm the head of that subcommittee, but we also appreciate that the Undercount is really all these subgroups such as children, as you speak of. The chairwoman of our school board is in charge of the youth count, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of these ideas that I've heard today with her. But that's how we're working. We're looking to supplement their activities. We're considering, for example, purchasing mobile tablet supplies that can be taken to areas where we know there's likely to be an undercount and deployed through a volunteer staff with a paid, logistics coordinator. But we're really focusing too on this idea of the internet first option that the census is going to be pushing, which for all the same people who don't respond to paper are just as likely not to respond, maybe even more so, to a computer questionnaire.
Great. I want to go back to the Spanish question for just a moment. I mentioned that there's national hub partners. The national hub for the Hispanic community is NALEO, the National Association of Latino Elected Officials. They have a census website in English and Spanish, so they're putting up materials there for everybody in the Spanish-speaking community. And if you go to censuscount.org, which is on my list of resources here, they connect to, I think it's on my list of resources. If not, we'll get it to you. Oh, yeah, it's there. They connect with the group that's the National Hub for Asian Americans, the group that's the National Hub for Middle Easterners, the group that's the National Hub for Native for tribes. And so all of those groups will probably be producing materials in different languages. And so, if you have a community that's linguistically isolated, that's a really good starting point to go to censuscounts.org and then see which organizations are working on the census in different languages. Ann Hayes, do you want to talk for a moment about your take-home piece?
Did you ask me, Deb? Sorry.
No, I asked Ann Hayes, who had written a comment in the chat box.
Hi, sorry, this is Anne. I apologize, I'm at a conference and it's quite loud here. I don't know if you all can hear me.
Go ahead, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So I'll just mention quickly that at Scholastic we've committed to creating a take-home piece that will go via our educators digitally. We'll be sending it out to all our educators nationwide to talk about the census and the importance of counting kids and encouraging our educators to share that message with families. We'll be doing this digitally to all of our educators. Would love to engage with the message research that I think I heard mentioned to ensure that we're on target with our messaging. We're also working with Yale's Center for Childhood Social Emotional Learning to make sure that we get that messaging correct. And then we're also looking to work with partners to see if we can't get support to actually physically distribute these materials to hard-to-count communities. So would love to engage with anyone who's interested in talking about that.
Is anyone working with Head Start and Migrant and Seasonal Head Start?
So I've been reaching out to the National Head Start, and they're interested in talking to me. We're just kind of missing each other, but we will be engaging them as part of the National Count All Kids effort. Having said that, you can also do that level of engagement at the state level and the local level, and I think that would be a great thing to be doing. I mean, we're trying to do what I think of as a two-prong approach. We're working with all the national organizations that serve these families and communities and asking them to, send the messages and materials down. And then we're also working with groups at the state level and having them kind of go laterally. And if you want to email me, my email I think is on the webinar. I can share our message research so far, and I can tell everyone that on September 10th, we're doing a webinar for everyone on our message research that's sponsored by the Funders Committee, and you can find the information about that on the Funders Committee website. So we'll be releasing our message research then, but Anne, it sounds like you need some information even before that, and we're happy to supply it. Is anyone else on the call doing some work on the Undercount of Young Children? And what are you doing? We have time, I think, for one more question if there is one. Do we have a question here? Doesn't sound like it. Kiki and Flo, do either of you have any last words?
Yeah, this is Kiki. Just a couple of points. One is that in New Jersey, our Advocates for Children of New Jersey and the community of organizations that focus on young children have been particularly effective advocacy leaders in the effort to secure state effort, state energy, and state money to support this effort. It's important to underscore that philanthropy alone cannot fund these the work to get a complete count, and the Federal Census Bureau itself has limited resources. So a public-private partnership that includes public money and philanthropy is, I think, really the way to go, and these organizations that are focused on the interests of young children bring a particularly resonant message to that work. The other point I want to make is that it's not too late to get involved. The census is happening next spring through the summer, but jumping in now to coordinated work in your state or region, it would be terrific. And if you can begin to educate your trustees and stakeholders about this with the aim of making some commitments in early fall or even middle fall, I think it's not too late to be part of a thoughtful and organized effort to have a complete count of all young kids and their families.
That's great.
Yeah, and I just wanted to...
Oh, I'm sorry. So one thing, Census Day itself is April 1st, 2020, and things, materials from the Bureau start going out in March, so that gives you the timeline. So what are your last comments here?
Well, I just wanted to echo what Kiki said. It's not too late. I think that we really need that we really need to take a look at our relationships, the platforms that we have that we can leverage, our networks, our grantees, and start educating. Just like Kiki, we are out on the road presenting to the National School Board Association, to the American Library Association, to the Pediatric Associations. We're writing the census into all the scope of work of our grantees wherever it makes sense. So just thinking about your relationships and the work that you're doing and how it's connected to the census and how you can leverage it would be fantastic. As Debbie mentioned, the majority of young children are missed on forms that were submitted. So it means that education is going to be huge. So we need to find those trusted messengers. We need to get them information, get them prepared so that when 2020 comes about, everybody's ready to go. So now's the time to start building that infrastructure, and yeah, we'd love to have more people in the fight.
Great. I want to say that Stacy Whitehouse tells me she's having trouble with our website signing up, and I thought we had fixed that glitch just late last week. So do try and use the website, but if you can't get on by the website, email me at dstein, D-S-T-E-I-N, at FOR-AmericaSchildren.org, and I'll add you separately, and of course we'll try and fix that glitch. I don't know what's going on there. I really want to thank both Flo and Kiki for joining us today and for giving such wonderful examples of all the different ways that funders can engage in this work. I really believe it's a critical way to improve the lives of young children, and it's also, as I keep saying, one where if we get the work done with the families, the change will happen, the increase in the funding will happen, and their lives will be better for a decade. So the potential power in it is pretty significant. So thank you all very much for joining us. And Shannon, did you want to wrap us up?
So I just want to thank our presenters, and there's been some questions in the chat box about people wanting the video, wanting different things. We will send out